We believe brain health is a human right. We believe it's a social and economic imperative. At ABI, we're democratizing global brain health by giving people access to the best minds and evidence-based information from around the world. Together, we are distilling complex science and turning it into actionable knowledge for everyone, everywhere. Will you join us?
And a continuing welcome all of you to Aspen Brain Institute's 2021 Expert Series. This extraordinary time of COVID has catapulted health to the forefront of our collective consciousness. We have all experienced a kind of surreal duality, often feeling we were never more alone, yet simultaneously never so united as in our suffering. How can we use this moment, this new consciousness of health, to propel us into better health as individuals and into better systems of health care? And what does that even mean? What does it look like? How do we do it? To help us think through these critical questions, we are absolutely delighted to welcome two experts, both of whom visit us from the future. My friend and colleague, Dr. Jordan Shlain, brings a powerful, globally respected voice to matters of health and health policy. He is a physician at Private Medical, a national practice which he founded. Jordan is also a digital health entrepreneur, and that is an understatement. Jordan is joined by his special close friend and digital media visionary, John Battelle. Mr. Battelle, celebrated founder of Wired magazine, co-created and serves as CEO of Recount Media, explained on their website as a video-first political media brand that cuts through the noise to give you all the facts in 5 minutes or less. Worthy goal indeed. For details of their extravagant and extraordinary bios, please visit our website. Our vision for today is to share with you, our global audience, an intimate conversation between two brilliant, opinionated friends, colleagues, philosophers, and activists. Their contrasting and complementary professional expertise will enrich their dialogue about a vision for optimal healthcare of the future. And in a perfect world, their conversation would be accompanied by a performance of their band, and how can I not know its name, with John on the drums and Jordan on the guitar. So Jordan, John, welcome both to Aspen Brain Institute's Expert Series. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ronnie. Very good to be here. My job is to serve as interlocutor, if you will, and to tease the genius out of Jordan's ever expanding mind. Jordan and I have had a rich and long friendship. He's also my doctor, I will acknowledge, it's fitting that we have this conversation with both of us having whiteboards behind us, because many of Jordan's myriad ideas have begun life on one whiteboard or another in conversations we've had where we've forgotten to play music and just ended up filling up the board with ideas. So we'll attempt to have a little bit of that sort of sense of exploration in this conversation. But I want to make sure we get to some specific points. So my job is to keep us on something of a track as we have this conversation. So Jordan, let's start really with a bit of a framing here. When you and I met, I found out you were a doctor, but it wasn't long thereafter that I found out you're something of a philosopher as well. And you have a philosophy of medicine, and a philosophy that I would say takes has a bit of a problem with the current approach that our healthcare system takes to the doctor-patient relationship. Can you explain to me what's different about your practice, private medical, and how does that ladder to a philosophy of how healthcare might better be executed?
Thank you, John. Thank you, Ronnie. Thanks for having me here. Great question. I think, going back to what Ronnie said is that, we both come from the future, and when you do autonoetic, exercises where you go into the future and you try to imagine what things could be and how they should be, that's always predicated on the cultural, political, and historical context from which we start that thought process. And, in the world of medicine, I grew up with a mother who was a PhD in psychology who basically said, let's sit on the couch and talk about it forever. I grew up with a father who was a surgeon that said, let's cut it out and next. And so they were both healers, but they both had a very diametrically different approach to solving a problem. So I look at the world of healthcare as a patient, if I was a patient, what would I want it to be? How would I want the entire experience to be from beginning to end? And ultimately, I believe that every person who's listening, watching, living would like to have a life that didn't interface with the healthcare system if it had a choice. You just live your life in a healthy way. And so the truth is that isn't going to happen because there's always something that happens in our health. To make that whole experience feel warm and not anxiety provoking, and gives each person the opportunity to get the best outcome that they thought they wanted, or the medical system thought they wanted, the fastest, with the least amount of resistance in the circuit and the most amount of communications to lower their anxiety. So I started with this concept of, the system that we have was built, it's not a system, first of all. I think, let's be honest. It's a freako system. It's not an ecosystem. And I want, in my mind's eye, I see an elegant system where the different actors in the healthcare system interface with the different actors in the non-healthcare system, so that there's a flow and an ease with which information is, received, absorbed, reflected back, and you can kind of run to ground anything there's a lot of unknowns in medicine. So I think tackling the uncertainty and the statistical uncertainty of everything is one of the more challenging things for the human brain to grok, if you will. And ultimately, that understanding of the future sense of my health, if I have a severe chest pain, am I going to die? We always generally revert to, is this thing going to kill me, whatever it is? We have this existential angst that generally underpins a new problem that we have. So private medical, the practice that I've built, tries to honor this existential angst and anxiety that everybody has when they have to interface with the healthcare system outside of the annual physical, which we go to learn about ourselves. But I think if you dig into that annual physical, by the way, you don't want to learn that something bad is happening. You want to get an A, but there's always something. We're just machines that have gears and pulleys, and there's always something that's a little out of whack. So ultimately, the way you interface with the doctor should not be once a year. It should be a continuous process of learning and education. It should be proactive. I should be reaching out to you. Like I tell people in the finance world, you don't invest $10 million in a company and have one board meeting a year for an hour. How are you going to know what's going on? And the human body is changing all the time. And what's more, science is changing all the time. And in order to be optimized for a longer term approach, you need someone who's looking at the new science, but that's also looking at you. And this is the concept of personalized medicine and precision medicine wrapped in a 5-star hospitality bracket. And you know this as a member of the practice. Like if there's a problem that needs fixing, it will get fixed quickly. But if there's not a problem that you're aware of, but I think it's a problem, I want to talk about it with you. I want to tell you the 5-year outlook on that thing if you do nothing, and the 20-year outlook on you do nothing, and you can decide. I mean, there was a big study that came out this morning. I was reading it, that showed that people who have poor sleep in the mid years of their life is an early indicator of dementia.
Yeah, well, I
So,
read that too, and the first thing I did was take a nap.
yeah, I actually slept while I was reading it. I read it asleep. So that's new data. You know, they have these Aura rings now where you can measure your sleep. And I think a lot of people think, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead. You know, I got too much work to do. I'll sleep later. And the truth is you'll wallow into this world of dementia where you can't even think, and you'll just be being taken care of by somebody else until you die. And that's not a way anybody wants to be. So
Right.
I think having honest, realpolitik conversations about things that people brush off, when you show the science behind it, is where we come in and try to give you a real option on a great next 10 years. So you can have an option on a next great 10 years.
Right. Well, the thing, and I want to try to put a little, you know, help people visualize what's different about being in a practice like the one you've created. For me, you know, it's been over a decade. You know, I think I'm almost used to it now, but I'm casting myself back when you were still early in the practice, but it was well developed, but it was early. Down to the last detail. When I came into the office, it didn't feel like a doctor's office. When I had to have, you know, the various things that you just need to do, like blood draws and, you know, that tests and labs and things like that, you get an actual robe as opposed to a paper gown. You know, there's these little touches that you've done that ladder to a sensibility that you shouldn't avoid the engagement with the conversation around your relationship to your health. You should be an active participant in it and a proactive participant in it. And I'm curious, you know, what inspired that approach, and how does that ladder to a philosophy of medicine?
Yes. So that robe, just to go there for 1 second, I remember early on when we were buying robes for our office, and this one woman came in and she said, should I take all my clothes off and put the robe on, or should I leave my underwear on and put the robe on? And, you know, if you want to do a real full exam, you need to have all the clothes off. And so I said, yeah, take all your clothes off and it was a paper robe thing that you get. And she said, well, is the opening in the front?
Right.
Or is the opening in the back? And when she asked me that question, I thought to myself, her entire dignity, like nobody goes into someone else's office and takes their clothes off. Like in a dentist's office, you don't. And, you know, maybe if you're changing at a store, but at least you're behind a wall, no one sees you and you come out with a fresh set of clothes. But I realized that her entire dignity was wrapped up in a piece of paper, and she didn't know if she should open it up in the front or the back. And I just felt that was a huge opportunity to wrap her in some dignity. And let's build a robe that has an opening in the back, so I can just peel open the back and I can listen to lungs and I can examine the spine through that portal. And also when you're doing an exam, you look in the armpits for lymph nodes, and you know, if you had these papers, you had to peel it back or you had to go around the breast, and it was just awkward. So we built slits underneath the armpits so we could do that. We built kimono sleeves so you could pull them up and check a blood pressure. So what you're hinting at, or what you're bringing up, is design. How do you design a health experience that keeps everyone's dignity intact? Because the less dignity you have, the more anxiety you have. And those are the principles. It's really first principles: dignity and design, and good outcomes, and the ability to have a conversation where one person really isn't uncomfortable. One is always uncomfortable when you're talking about the risk of cancer or the risk of heart disease, or, oh, it looks like your blood test shows that you're, you know, on the way to getting diabetes. Like, nobody wants to hear that.
Right.
But they're okay to hear it if it's not paternalistic, if the language that's used is supportive, and there's a plan to how to get you to the other side of that. And I'm there, though. I'm with you the whole time. Like, I'm not going to leave your side until we get the good outcome that we want. And I think that sense of belonging to something that's got your back while you're in a universe of uncertainty gives great pause and comfort that I think actually helps get a better outcome in and of itself.
Yeah. And the thing that there's a metaphor here that it might be a little bit dangerous in that there's an access issue, right? But let me use the metaphor and then we can get to that. You know, you referenced earlier that, you know, you wouldn't put a bunch of money into a company and then meet with them once a year, right? You'd be engaged with that because it meant a lot to you, but that people sort of invest in their experience of medicine only when they have to, only when they're forced to, and only when they don't want to, right? Because no one wants to engage in a negative experience, but that's basically what the healthcare system is, a negative experience, right? And it struck me that there was so much positivity in the experience early on with the practice. Now, one of the reasons for that, of course, is that because your clients can afford to. And I think the question is this approach scalable to what we understand to be the healthcare system? Or is this something that really can only be accessed by people of means?
Yeah, so I think about that a lot, and I look to the world for examples and models and analogies everywhere. And one of there's two ways that innovation enters the world or change enters the world. It's top down or bottom up, right? And in the world where you're designing things, it's usually top down. And Mercedes invented the airbag. And back, I remember those days, if you wanted the best safety for your family, you could only have it if you were super wealthy, because you had to buy a Mercedes. Ultimately, though, it was such a good idea and it was designed so well that they took it off their patent and gave it to everybody. And now everybody driving a Nissan Sentra has that airbag.
Right.
So until you spend the R&D, the time and money and just the scar tissue of making mistakes over and over and over again, or learning over and over and over again, you can't get the model right to scale in the first place. So I look at myself as someone who is fortunate to have the budget and the time and the creative people to design a system that I hope people will say, hey, I that's a better way. And by the way, rewind the clock 30 years, like, we didn't know a lot in medicine. We know a lot more now. And the system was always designed around getting something fixed when it broke. But we're moving to a system where you fix it before it breaks, or identify the problem before it becomes a problem. So that's happening right now. And you remember, because I think it was an early whiteboard session where I came up with the concept of, how does technology help me, the doctor, and help my patient at the same time? Where's LinkedIn helps recruiters and people looking for jobs at the time. I remember LinkedIn was one of the examples. Yahoo helped people looking for news or stock quotes and stockbrokers. So there was always two people that benefited from this internet technology thing. And where was it in healthcare? And so I realized, one of the big epiphanies I had in the design is I had a woman come to see me with a cough and a fever and a shortness of breath, and she didn't look well. And as a doctor, you identify a 70-year-old that walks in that looks like that, something's really wrong. So I listened to her lungs, and she clearly had pneumonia. And I gave her antibiotics. I gave her my cell phone number, and I said, you should be better, in 5 to 7 days. 98, 95%, efficacy of this antibiotic. And, call me if things aren't going well. So day 1 went by, day 2 went by. I didn't hear from her for 5 days. So in that model, no news is good news. Now, in our world now, we would say no data is good data, but who would ever say that? No one would say that, would they? So I thought, I actually, she was out of sight, out of mind, really, because I was seeing other patients. And then the phone rang, and it was the emergency room. And she was in the hospital, and the emergency room doctor called me and said, hey, your patient's here with a respiratory rate of 40 and a temperature of, 39.5. And she's an oxygen level of 80, and we're sending her up to the ICU, and there's a 50-50 chance she'll make it. And my heart sank. And I thought, why didn't she call me? I made it that easy. I gave her my cell phone number.
Which
there's nothing easy.
Not even normal for a doctor to do, is to give someone their cell phone number.
Right. And then it hit me. Shame on me. I should have called her to check in on her. And the epiphany I had about kind of design and anxiety and humanity is, I did what's called the cognitive empathy, where you actually leave your body and try to be somebody else. Don't feel how they feel, but be them. And so I thought, she's in her bed. She wakes up the next morning and she asks herself one question: am I the same? Am I better? Or am I worse? And if she's worse, she's going to say, well, it's just one day. Like I can't expect to be better on right away. He told me it was going to be 5 to 7 days. If she's the same, she's not going to call me because and if she's better, she's not going to call me. So on day one, I'm probably not getting a call unless she's really, really bad.
Right.
And then the next day she wakes up, day two, she asks herself, am I the same, better, worse? If she's worse, she may wait another day because she wants to give it some time. If she's better, she's not going to call me. If she's the same, she's not going to call me. So play this out. Like each day she's giving herself she's trying to run the algorithm in her head of how she's doing. What I realized is, if you're the same every day, you're actually worse because you should be getting better.
Right.
So I created this little algorithm, which in a little app that was email. It's called Health Loop. It was the feedback loop in healthcare that doesn't exist. How can I communicate with all of my patients every single day without having to actually communicate with them, like by typing and hitting send? And ultimately, patients would get an email from me. And from a design standpoint, like, who gets an email from their doctor? And the subject line, which I think is a very magical place, I wrote, Dr. Shlain wants to check in with you. So I'm a patient, I'm sitting there, and I asked my patients after I built this, I'm going to give you a prescription, and all I want you to do is check your email once a day and spend 10 seconds on it. Because all you would do, the email would say, Dr. Shlain wants to check in with you. How are you feeling today? And it would say, I'm the same, I'm better, or I'm worse. And all you do is click the link and it would say, thank you. It would open up a web page and say, thank you. On the back end, I had a dashboard and I could track everybody and their trends. And anybody that hit a threshold trend would trigger a text to me, and then I would call them. So I could follow everybody every day. And what that does, but what I gave is, I gave one, a better was a positive one, a worse was negative one, and a same was a negative a half. So I wanted to make it a real negative trend to be the same. And ultimately, that turned into a software company, raised millions of dollars. And that's out in the world today. Hundreds of thousands of people are getting daily. I got a patent on that too, by the way. And by the way, these are people that are in low income neighborhoods that need a hip surgery from the local hospital and pick the city. So I took something I learned from the high end, going back to the airbag metaphor, and I brought it to the masses. And we did a 18-month multi-center, multi-state clinical trial with funded, and published, that showed that people who were randomized to get this digital tool versus people who weren't had a 50% reduction in readmissions back to the hospital after a major event. And it saved $654 per surgery if you use this tool than if you didn't, because the tool connected you with your doctor's office and it guided you through the process from beginning to end. So there are ways to bring this out to the bigger, broader world, but you have to start simple and figure it out in some cohort, and then, put it out in the wild in bigger cohorts and see what works and what doesn't. But it did work. And so that's the democratization of what I've been building in a digital instantiation.
When you mentioned this, the idea of getting an email from a doctor does not seem strange to me at all. As a matter of fact, it's text and email is how I interact almost, certainly weekly, and given 5 members of my family, probably daily with your office. It's incredibly efficient and comforting, I would say. But it made me realize that a lot of people do not have that habit, number one, until the last 14 months. What happened over the course of this pandemic, is pretty extraordinary in any number of ways. Certainly in my business, in the media business, we've noticed complete and probably intractable consumer behavior changes. They will always, these behaviors will be with us from now forward. What have you noticed that has changed in the medical field, in consumer behavior, in healthcare because of the pandemic?
Well, the kind of right between the eyes no brainer is this kind of telemedicine Zoom meeting concept, and the existing structures that exist in healthcare are very brick and mortar, very high overhead, and it used to be pre-pandemic that in the insurance-based world, if a patient called you and you talked to them, you couldn't bill for that. But if they came to the office, you could bill $70 for that. So why would you ever talk to somebody on the phone?
Right.
Because you could spend all your day on the phone and not make any money, right? That was the way the payment structures existed. So when the pandemic happened, all these doctors reached out to their insurance companies and said, hey, I need to get paid for a Zoom visit because I'm working from home, but I'm still plying my trade with expertise. And so then insurance companies were very quickly, Medicare was first, and everybody was forced to just mirror whatever you got paid in the office, you got paid the same for this Zoom visit or for this telemedicine. Now, so now, and all the doctors and hospitals that resisted ever wanting to do that, whether it was because they loved going in their office or they just didn't want to telemedicine was weird. Video visit medicine, because I want to get back to that. I think telemedicine is very different than video visit medicine. Mm-hmm. Is now there are entire companies that have been scaled up so that now you can white label a telemedicine digital platform. So any doctor in your clinic can spend a day working from home and do virtual visits if they want. The problem is that overhead didn't get cheaper. And now insurance companies are now trying to talk about, well, maybe we'll lower the rates now for telemedicine, for video visits compared to, there's a movement where doctors are trying to say, oh, no, you don't. No. A minute is a minute. I don't care where I am. But so that's a fight that's coming. But I think it's going to be lost by the people who pay, because it certainly opens up a whole new world for the patient. Like I was talking to one of my buddies who's a hypertensive expert in Reno, and I asked him in the middle of the pandemic, how's this working for you? And, because he really just checks blood pressures. He said, well, now there's devices that can check blood pressure at home. And he said, I now have patients that have never come into my office because they want to drive the 30 minutes, park, wait, come up the elevator. Again, pre-COVID, they just never wanted to, that was a huge part of their day. He said, now every week they want to see me because I can do a Zoom visit, and they're much more engaged because you just removed all the resistance in the circuit. And so again, design. So to your point is, I think it's opened up people's minds that there's another way, maybe a better way, or a supplemental, augmented way to practice medicine. But to your point earlier, you text and email, that's telemedicine to me, but it's asynchronous. Video visit is synchronous. Office visits are synchronous. Telephone calls are synchronous. And then there's text and email.
Right.
And other versions of asynchronous. And the truth is it's really hard to get two people. I mean, you want to talk about resistance in a circuit, it's getting two people's schedules aligned. That's why there's assistants and there's all these people just to get to. So, in an asynchronous world where information does, sometimes you need to be synchronous. There's clearly a place for that, but there's a huge space for asynchronous communication that is not paid for right now. You don't get paid for emails and you don't get paid for text. So to me, the medical structure doesn't, they're afraid to open up that floodgate, because then everyone's all the patients are going to use it, doctors are going to use it, and then there goes the costs. The healthcare costs are going to go up.
Yeah, something that I want to put a pin in the pandemic, because there's another larger part of that I want to ask your point of view on. But to dig into that point, what I find kind of fascinating is and I'm going to tease it out, is how important the incentive structure is and the payment system is in the healthcare system. It's primary. It seems to be the primary design, fundament of the system is, how do people get paid? When do they get paid? For what do they get paid? For what do they not get paid? And that seems to be a blockage. As a matter of fact, when one of the things that I found most compelling about joining the practice was that I was finally going to have all of my medical information in one place that would be portable, so that if something occurred to me, like when I had to have surgery on my neck, that's a new doctor I'd never met before, and here's everything about me in a portable thing I can give to that person, and he can review it and get smart on me quickly. That didn't exist, even though there was such a thing as electronic medical records. And what I learned in asking you and talking to you about it was that the electronic medical record system, such that it is, was built for the payment infrastructure. It was
it's a glorified cash register. Yeah, yeah. That masquerades as a data tool.
Right.
That's right.
And I don't have access to it. I don't have rights to send it around easily. It feels like it's kind of like this old school.
But John, just yesterday or last week, the U.S. government passed the Open Notes law, and so and it's actually causing great problems. But I'll explain to you what's happened. So now,
great as in good problems, or great as in large problems?
Great as in large. So right now, if you get an MRI at UCSF or you get a blood test at Quest, that data comes to me first. I look at it. I call you with the results. Sometimes that takes a couple of days. Right now, they're sending them directly to you as soon as they're off the press. So you may get the MRI report the same time I do, or before I do, because you may be anxious to get it and I'm busy seeing patients, or the blood test, but it's all in like foreign language, right? It's in like deep medical speak. So what's happening now is patients are calling us and saying, hey, oh my God, I'm dying. Look at my MRI. And we're like, we haven't looked at it yet. And so we're like, wait, why are these institutions and companies sending people their information before it's gone through the filter of the doctor to like put some clarity and nuance around what this means? And I want to get back to what you were saying earlier, but ultimately we believe that the reason they're doing it is these companies, like, imagine if you got your MRI and you called them and said, hey, give me my MRI. Now they need a whole call center to register like, they don't have a system designed for make the request, here it is. They're just giving it to everybody. So now we have all these patients calling us up with all these new reports that they're getting everywhere they go. And it's like the floodgates of data have opened with no filters.
Right.
And so like the problem they tried to solve was super inelegant. The way that it's, hopefully it'll get to a place where there's some elegance to it. But this is the kind of the clunky machine of people, cover your ass and like, I don't want to, so medicine's a hyper regulated market. But I want to go back to what you said about your neck surgery for a second.
Yeah.
Which is, when I send you to the neck surgeon, I want to give him all the data, but that's data only that lives in a database. Then there's, let me tell you about John, like, and which is another set of data that's important for that surgeon to know. It's how they're going to talk to you about post-op, how they're going to like communicate with you. So data in and of itself is interesting, but it's insufficient. It needs a kind of a social layer to it that, it's not just what's the matter with you, it's what matters to you. And it's the kind of combination of those two things coming together to really put a finer point on, I don't know, humanity, if you will. That aren't just slabs of meat that need to be fixed. Right. Everyone's got their own perspective on, like, people don't want to get vaccines. Right. Well, that's their choice, but it's, maybe it's a bad choice, but it's theirs. You can't mandate that. So there's a lot of elements to the human aspect of medicine. This is a relationship. I think that often gets, I wouldn't say poo-pooed, but in the geeky world of data and EMRs, it's like, well, who cares about that? Like, look at all the data over here. And the data over there that sits in that database, I call them waidabases, because the data just waits there for someone to go access it. It's not the data itself doesn't have agency to communicate with other data to come up with patterns and things to then present to people and say, hey, look, this data plus this data plus this data that were just sitting in containers. They all talked to each other. They all came together and said, this looks like something else. Maybe we should look at that. So there's no intelligence to this data right now. It just all lives on its own.
One of the things that pull this together, one of the things that has always struck me about the healthcare system that is broken is that it was designed for those who pay the bills, for the insurers. The whole system seems built for that, number one. Number two, I'm kind of welcoming all these new reports that are coming at me simply because I guess I'm a person who knows what to do with them, right? I know that I want to send them to you and discuss them with you. They don't scare me. But the thing that I hate, and I think everyone hates, is the amount of administrative overhead that we as patients have, that we get deluged with billing information, with like, we don't know if to pay a bill or not to pay a bill. We get 6 bills from the same doctor for different amounts. We are confused by that system, because that system seems almost deliberately set up to confuse us. And my question for you is, as it relates back to the topic of the pandemic, it seems like we had a long moment, and we're still in it, but we had this very bad long year where the world, and specifically the United States, realized, okay, this system is not very good. This is a bad situation. We handled it very poorly. We supposedly are the most developed nation with the best healthcare in the world, but we blew this. Is this a moment where we might actually see fundamental change in the healthcare system because of the awareness the pandemic has brought to everybody and to politicians? Or do you think it's just going to be business as usual on the other side of this?
I think it's going to be both. And I know that sounds like a mealy-mouthed answer, but I'm going to be specific. It's a $3.6 trillion industry. People have a hard time wrapping it. And that money is going from taxpayer pockets and insurance paying people like you and me's pockets to somebody. Those somebodies don't want to give that up. And until we have a system that reflects, so that's that truth. But then there's a bottoms up and a middle up movement amongst the doctors to change it too. But I'll bring it back to systems. Donella Meadows, who was I believe an MIT professor in system design, developed a hierarchy for how do you design a system? Where do you find the leverage points in a complex system to make change? And so if we really want to make change, we need to understand what the system is and where the leverage points are. And she was really elegant, and I'm not going to remember all of them, but she starts with like the most minute things that you can do, like the least leverage points are constants, parameters, and numbers. Change the price of things. Yeah, that'll do a little bit. But the other, if you go up her hierarchy, one is the size of buffers in the system. The other one is the structure, the physical structure of things, the lengths of delays of information flows, the strength of negative feedback loops, and the gain on positive feedback loops, because positive feedback loops are bad. As you go up the hierarchy, it's how is information flow structured? That's more powerful. There's a lot of leverage there. But then you get to the real leverage, which is the rules of the systems, incentives, punishments, constraints, stuff like that. And then you get the power to add, change, evolve, or self-organize a system, which we're not there. And then this is where it gets really interesting for me, is what are the goals of the system, right? If we actually could elucidate the goals of a system, we could actually design a system. But above the goals of the system, her number two is the mindset or the paradigm out of which the system, its goal, structure, rules arises. So that's the mindset of the paradigm. And then the final most important leverage point in a system is the power to transcend paradigms. Do we believe that the paradigm we're in doesn't work? And are we willing to make that change? And I believe that there's a lot of people that do want to transcend the paradigm, but the only way we can transcend paradigms is through language and words. And the question I'll leave for this group is, and I ask a lot of people, is what is health? What does it mean? And if I ask 50 people what health means and I get 50 different answers, which I think I would, how can you design a system around things that we can't agree on? So we have to come back to language and try to all agree on common, this word means that. Does everybody agree on that? Great. There's in aerospace, there's something called the mediation of representation. And if 10 countries are trying to build a space station and someone builds a little O-ring that's this size and this shape, every other country that's helping to build the space station needs to agree that that's what it is so they can add to it. And right now we are in disagreement all over the map of what we want, what it is, where it should go. And I think that's the conversation we really need to have to move this ball forward and seize this moment.
Well, I'm going to let it stay there. That's a good place to end. This went far too fast, and there's a number of things I wish I could have gotten to, but maybe at another time. So, Dr. Shlain, thank you. And I'm going to pass it back over to you, Ronnie.
He's just getting started.
I know.
Guys, it's just getting started, precisely. And to that point, let's take some of the concepts that we've elaborated and enumerated, albeit way too briefly, and apply them to a specific scenario, a hypothetical scenario. But let's imagine a little 7-year-old girl, and she's the single child of a single mother. The family lives in public housing in Harlem. The little girl wakes up at 6:45 in the morning. It's a school day. Let's talk ideally about her health day. What can we do? What can we think about? What can we plan for? What can we create today, or at least begin to optimize the trajectory of her life over the next 10 years?
So I think it's really simple here. It's literacy, it's education, and it's nutrition. For those of you who are roughly my age and my vintage, we had Schoolhouse Rocks, and we all learned about government through songs and cartoons in school. And for some reason, that was important for our government to teach us civics. We don't teach health in schools at all, at all. And we don't teach people about the value of nutrition. And the truth is that 6-year-old girl is going to get a Coke and a Pop-Tart and a bunch of crap. And then that's going to cause inflammation in her body and pre-diabetes, and her brain's going to get a little inflamed because it causes microinflammation. And then there's going to be a disadvantage she has in learning, because there's like her brain and her body are just like swollen. And we're expected for her to like get a great education. And then, so like we need to start early, like, you know, in this cohort of kids, and teach them what health is. And it's, you know, it's nutrition, it's understanding why things are the way they are. And a lot of the language we use, going back to language, you know, in the African-American community, especially in the South, you know, they call diabetes the sugar. You got the sugar. And, you know, there's this sense that they got the sugar, that not like somebody gave it to them. And like big food and big, you know, the people that are ignoring these communities are giving them the sugar. They're not getting it. It's not their fault. But so I think like starting with education for them, so they know that all that food, which by the way, they like, it tastes good, is bad for them, but you got to give them alternatives. And I think there's a lot of literacy that we, you know, us doctors and us medical people and us science people, we have a hard time translating what you know, into metaphors that are grounded in people's realities so that they can understand them. So I think that's where we need to start.
Jordan, you talk about that food tasting good. And of course, it was designed to taste good.
But so were strawberries. Strawberries taste really good, and they were designed to taste good by nature. And it's made from sunlight, soil, and water. That sugar is made it's made from a factory, pretty much. They're all chemicals. And it's totally corrosive to your body because there's no fiber in it. That strawberry is chock full of fiber and sugar.
Absolutely.
So we need to start promoting these things that taste good, that are natural. They're just expensive, and we subsidize sugar, but we don't subsidize strawberries. That's another problem.
Well, that's another problem. Again, to put it mildly. We can fast forward that 7-year-old little girl to today. And I was reading recently, to me, what is absolutely stunning findings in an American Psychological Association survey of about 3,500 adults. The average weight gain during the year of COVID for those who gained weight and did not wish to gain weight, as opposed to those who lost weight. And there were a significant number of people who lost weight who did not wish to lose weight. But the average weight gain for American adults, 29 pounds. It just blows one's mind. And fast forward that to the sugar, and a pandemic of chronic disease with the potential to have ramifications for decades. And is that going to be, you know, John was asking about, well, are we going to somehow lose the momentum of the moment and revert to, doesn't that also have to be the focus of medical now?
But I think that weight gain is usually stress eating. It's not like people are hungrier in a pandemic. And what that speaks to is mental health. And that 6-year-old girl is living probably in a neighborhood, you know, if she's you know, of color and in a poverty, the external stress in that universe is really real. And, you know, from like food insecurity, like family insecurity, just income insecurity, those all create stress. And so when you have stress and you have a pandemic and there's more uncertainty, I mean, the one thing we do is we eat. It's comfort eating. And that's where I think, you know, stuff like universal basic income is interesting to kind of at least give people that degree of a floor. Is that the society we want to live in? I think it is. We don't want anybody to be on the street and broke and poor. I think there's a lot of, you know, mental health related pieces here. And people talk about the social determinants of health. And for the geeky healthcare people, they think, oh, you know, when we talk about bad neighborhoods with bad health, it's the social determinants of that health. And what I would say is actually, it's not the social determinants, it's the political determinants, it's the policy determinants, because politics and policy determine social structures. So don't blame the social structures on the bad outcomes of that neighborhood. Blame the politics and the policy on the bad outcomes for that neighborhood. And let's pin the tail on the right donkey, because if we pin the tail on and make it that community's fault, like that probably creates more anxiety. So I think, you know, again, back to language, and I think there's a lot of things that are really important and relevant here to try to solve these problems. But we do need a national conversation where we need leaders, and we need people that aren't afraid to speak truth to power or truth to money. Because
I think I recall you had a different designation for the disease that we call type 2, I believe, diabetes, right? You want to call it sugar disease, right?
I want to call it the overconsumption of processed food disease.
Right. And that would be a powerful thing if society adopted a accurate description of what is actually happening in the name of a disease that is so commonly, you know, brought up.
Well, it's a disease. It's a disease that doesn't exist in kids unless it's imposed upon them. It used to be called adult onset diabetes. Then they changed it to type 2 diabetes. And they changed it because if a bunch of kids were getting an adult onset disease, you'd have to ask the question, why? So before anyone could ask the question, why, they just changed the name of the disease.
And again, I think that might speak to the infrastructure of payment we were talking about before.
There's a lot of money. Nestle makes the sugar that you eat and then the diabetes pills that you take for the sugar that you eat. they're on both sides of it now. So like we have to acknowledge that kids should not be getting adult onset diseases. If we could all agree on that, we could start to build a system. That's a paradigm. Can we transcend that paradigm? If we can, we could probably change the goals of the system.
Right.
And
that raises the question about who is the we. We can talk about the fragmentation of the healthcare system, but in some ways that actually pales relative to the fragmentation of public discourse, of political collaboration. How do we speak truth to power? How do we as individuals experience agency and have impact? And I'd love to hear from both of you on that.
You go first, John, since you're in politics.
Well, I mean, you know, the pandemic has been an incredible time of awakening, I think, politically across this country, and it was an extraordinary day that we had yesterday. You know, a very big news day in a big issue that became central and actually eclipsed the pandemic last summer in terms of the way that we understand race in the United States. but more broadly, and speaking to some of the issues that Jordan raised around how we interact with a broken system with bad design goals. We have a broken system with bad design goals as it relates to our relationship to media. It is quite similar. And we have a system that has been built with sort of a very similar type 2 diabetes built into the bloodstream of an information ecosystem. We get very bad, highly processed, bullshit into our feeds on a regular basis. They're literally called feeds. And they feed us direct. And we have become unhealthy as a society because of the way the media has been feeding us this
digital nutrition.
Yeah, digital media. I mean, Facebook feeds, YouTube feeds, Twitter, you name it. More than 60% of Americans get their primary news from social media today. And you can see that has not elevated the discourse politically in this country. If anything, it has made it far worse. And so again, we have to have the courage to imagine a new paradigm. And that's certainly part of the work that I do. I'm going to stop it there and let Jordan address it. And I know we're getting short on time.
Yeah, I mean, I really have to agree with almost everything you said there as far as how do we change it. I think it starts with leadership. I think it starts with somebody who, it's so funny. I was at a conference a couple of years ago and some CEO of a hospital was talking about how he had to lower his diabetes rates. And the guy was massively overweight. And I don't know if it was like a problem that like was in or out of his control, but it's like, it doesn't look like leadership right there. Like that looks like a guy telling you, do what I say, but not what I do. And I asked him, he's like, yeah, I drive to work every day and I stop by an Arby's and I eat like 2 big hamburgers and fries. I'm like, it's his own anxiety. So I think there's a mental health wrapper, but I think we need political leaders to state out loud that these are problems that need fixing, not kind of bury it in some subcommittee where like the public health people are talking about it and they just get buried by big money from pharma and hospital systems and big food. I mean, you saw that the soda tax in California just got like killed today from like the multi-million-dollar spend from big soda. So now kids are going to have sodas in school. So like, someone's got to step up and say enough is enough. And they've got to be willing to lose an election over the right thing. Because nobody wants to lose elections right now. They just want to say the thing that wins the elections, and I think that's it's weak. It's not leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're agreeing that the we is all of us, and the leadership can be at the level of the global, the national, the neighborhood. Jordan, you and I had a conversation earlier today. You asked me, what if we could change the menu at the largest fast food restaurant in the United States of America? And I paused and you responded, I'm talking about what we feed the kids at school.
The largest fast food restaurant is our public school system. They are, and by the way, all schools in the United States, a little history lesson here, used to have their own cafeterias and their own chefs. And then Coke and Pepsi and Taco Bell came along and said, hey, I got a better solution for you. We'll provide the meals and we'll take over. You can outsource the kitchen, which schools were happy to do because it was not, they're educators, they're not chefs. And in comes big food. And now, they're just, making it in factories and their hormone chicken. And so, I started a nonprofit called Eat Real. And what we do is we go into schools and say, do you want to be doing this? Do you really want to be serving your kids this? And every teacher and principal and superintendent's like, no, but we don't have a choice. We don't know how to do it another way. So we've come up with a certification process where we raise money and we go into schools and we help them change their menu to educate the kids with literacy and education on what real food is and why it matters. And so, we just got a grant this week, a $284,000 grant, first California grant, which is a farm to school program where we have 500 schools around the country that we're now starting to certify. And it's a thing. We're poisoning our kids and we have to stop it. And I think the schools want to stop it and the parents want to stop it, but nobody knows how. So we've been developing tools to help them do it and we help them implement it. And we're going to be doing a bunch of studies. There's a school in Mount Diablo, by the way. We removed one chocolate milk SKU from their menu. We did the math. It's 10 pounds of sugar per kid that they're not going to get per semester by doing one thing. Think about that. A kid's going to have, think about 10 pounds of sugar. That's a huge bag. That's how much they're getting just with the chocolate milk.
Well, I
so
hope
there's a lot of work to do.
As I started to say, I hope every person listening and watching, Jordan, you said how much language matters, and indeed it does. And John, when you were introducing Jordan, you talked about his expanding mind. Somehow the language today has been a lot about expanding waistlines. Whether that be the quality of food, the quality of media intake, or the end result of a lack of leadership, and yet we all have to assume responsibility for leadership at every level. Listen, you two. While we obviously cannot heal a sick culture with personal bandages, I think there is a collective sense of hope, of optimism that we can accomplish the impossible with shared vision, with values, with collective purpose. And the two of you have so illuminated our path. And I say this from the bottom of my heart. I truly wish we had additional time today to continue this particular discussion. And speaking for the Aspen Brain Institute, so hope you will return. And thank you both so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to participate and keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
And to our loyal global audience, we invite you to visit aspenbraininstitute.org for more information about both Jordan Shlain and John Battelle and their work, as well as all ABI recordings, summaries, resources, and events to be scheduled. Thank you all so much, and see you soon.